Okay, good morning. So, my friends, we finished Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 2, page 1204. And before we get to the next volume, I just want to go over a few things. And first of all, sum up what we learned in the last class, its conclusion, and also make some overall points, and then be ready to go into the third volume. Quite a few people have asked me, actually, when you're starting the third volume, because they want to join. So if there's anyone you know that wanted to join, but felt like they don't want to come in the middle. So even though volume 3 continues, but it is a new theme that we're going to be learning. So if there's anybody you know, let them know about that. Probably begin tomorrow, volume 3, till we get through everything here, and tying up things at the end of volume 2. Okay. So a few things. First of all, let's just sum up what we learned. I did go a little quicker than usual when we finished on Sunday, Erev Shavuos, the end of this discourse. So, as I've already summed up, but I'll do it again because it's so critical to the understanding of the entire Hemshech. The Rebbe Rashab here, before the end of the Mimer itself, the Hashem Amra Machasani, discussing and tying up the discussion of V'yadaita hayim v'shavesa levavecha ki Hashem hu alikim ki avayu alikim b'shamayim mimal v'al mitachas. Specifically focused on the last two statements, avayu alikim b'shamayim mimal v'al mitachas, that referring to, I'm starting from there, and I'll broaden it out in a moment, that's referring to two different levels of Havaya Hu Elikim. One is Havaya Elikim as it is, the Havaya Elikim recognizing the divine within existence, that even in the state of where the Havaya gets concealed in Elikim, in this, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, in creation existence, you come to remove the concealment of Elikim and recognize Havaya Elikim al Aretz Mitachas. And that's something that we can more tangibly relate to, because we can see with our own eyes, we can look at existence, and from existence we come to see the divine force within existence. As you spoke about Sumarim and Nechem. Then Shemayim Emal, that comes in the verse first because it's a higher level. Shemayim Emal is referring not to the Eir HaGvul, which is the Havaya Elikim of Ba'aretz Mitachas, in the earth below, but the Eir HaBligvul, the infinite divine energy, which is Shemayim Emal, which is above existence, beyond existence. And that we also come to recognize. That's Havaya de La'ela. That's already a level of the divine that's beyond existence. So in the process of how our Avodah, our service works, we go from the bottom up. You start from your Yesh, the Yesh HaNivra, your being, your existence, your ego, and your self-contained consciousness. And from there you grow to become more divine consciousness, not so egocentric, but God-centric. And slowly you climb until you come to Shemayim Emal, recognizing and being absorbed, and thirsting to be absorbed in the higher levels of the divine, which you come to recognize is the true reality. So these are stages. As we come from V'yadaita Ayin v'shavesa levacha, from our awareness, our perception, das, V'yadaita, and emotionally, we come to recognize the higher levels, which he called is a form of longing and aching and chelas ava. On the highest levels is basically a feeling of lack, that though you can see and relate to godliness almost as a total reality, and yet you can't fully have it, so it creates a chela, as he said, and that's quenched. La'asid lavu will be the total time, it will be the time when we get the full healing of that. And that's quenched, as he said, through Samchuni B'Asheshes and Ravduni B'Tapuchim, through different levels of Torah mitzvahs on one level, which brings the Eir HaGvul into play, and then Teshuva, Tefillah and Teshuva, he said, that brings the Eir HaBligvul into play. So the Eir HaBligvul essentially quenching some of the thirst as much as possible through our Veda, or what he said later through Teshuva Ilah. Teshuva Ilah in this level, because Teshuva Ilah is that cry from the depths of the heart that reaches into the depths of Ein Sof, that's beyond existence. Now that he does, even though he didn't explain it, in essence, even tzaddikim could have Teshuva Ilah, but the fact is that it comes, that type of cry usually comes when there's something lacking. So when it comes lacking, he spoke the other extreme, where it's lacking to the point that you get down to chayla, that's not just lacking vision, riyah, or lacking, or you have riyah rather, and lacking the actually full experience of godliness. Or lacking riyah, where you have 49 gates of bina, but you don't have the 50th. But it comes down to chayla that's deeper than that, on a very practical level, the chayla of the animal soul that has wandered off, and actually defied either chayla sheyesh b'sakana, ein b'sakana, whether it's permissible desires or not permissible ones. And then the healing of that is through a real tshuva tata, where you feel sad about it, and then remorse and completely accepting a new path that then leads to tshuva ilah. So though he didn't state it clearly, explicitly, it seems, just in case some were wondering how you explain it, he did speak about the chayla sava being quenched on page 11, the end of the previous Mimer, end of the Lech Lecha Mimer. So he said the following, on page 1195, that it came through Basheshes, which was the Ayin, Nichnas Ayin, Yotza Seid, that reveals the Seva of Kalaman. That is a response, Ki chelis ava oni. So therefore, Samchuni Basheshes, support me with the wine, and bedeck me and cover me with the tapuchim. And he said that was both to be mamshech, both the makif, and then even higher than the makif, which is reich, the tefillah v'reich, the tshuva. So that seems applies to right. That applies even to someone that does not succumb to the animal soul. But later, the discussion is definitely that you need to come through some type of, from the more you feel the darkness, the stronger is the thirst for the light, and that brings a deeper tshuva, and that tshuva will ultimately lead to tshuva ilah that also draws down that higher level of refuah that heals it from the root, not just the symptoms, but also the root. Okay, so that was the discussion, the last mimer or two, a mimer I would say, but that followed a whole discussion on Havayu Elikim, of the different interpretations, as I said, Shema Mal Rotz, as I already explained. But then ultimately it came down to that it's really the joining of the two perspectives, Das Tachten and Das Elyon, because that's where the topic began earlier. We was talking about the yesh of the ayin, the ayin of the yesh hanivra and the ayin of the yesh hamiti, and therefore you need to have both. But he said that the eish hey and the eish yud join, and that comes. What he said, the words Havaya Emes, Havaya Elikim, Havaya de Le'ela joins together with Havaya de Le'tata. So therefore, you have then both elements in play, like we spoke about the Eira Gvul and the Eira Bligvul. And that followed the whole discussion before that about Shabbos and the weekdays, Yom V'Layla, Ratzah and Shuv, which was all part of explaining how post-Simtsum or post-Parsa, like he said, where there's a mechitza and there are dividers and partitions, we can ultimately eliminate them and connect beyond the concealment that these parsais, that these partitions create, like he discussed here. So the healing ultimately is the healing of refuah le'elam that brings the healing to the entire existence, that we can now have the interface between existence and the highest levels of the divine through all this Aveda that we've been talking about, by first eliminating the concealment within ourselves and our animal soul, then eliminating the concealment between the Gvul and the Bligvul, and ultimately to the highest levels. And that's the ultimate repair and healing of all the mechitzas, of all the separations and partitions. The ultimate seamless connection that we will have with the source, the the source of all life. Not just that we have a healthy situation, but we also connect to the source of all health. So at the root, as he explained. Okay. So that's a little context. Now, as I mentioned, the Partitions plays a very big role earlier in Ayin Beis here in volume 2, because that's a key to understanding the concealments that both exist as the concealments that exist between Chedesh and Chayil, between the holy and the unholy, or the healthy and the unhealthy, Chayil from the word Cheli. And there's also Avdila Pareches, that there's also the separation, the dividers between holy and holier. So all of these are being ultimately addressed step by step. Between holy and holier is like between Eira Gvul, Elokus to Eira Bligvul. And between the holy and the profane, or the unhealthy, is the lower level where we reveal the divine, even in the concealed state that is here below, than the animal soul's passions for the world, the worldly desires that counter the divine, the passion for the divine. Like he brought from Chavos Halavovis on page 1203, that you can't have both of them reside together. Just like fire and water cannot be in the same container, you also can't have the passion for this world and the passion of the God, for God at the same time. Since I'm mentioning that, so remember he brought from the Zohar, he says, "V'hu inyan raza the tartan achsin shein tzoros zelazeh." So I was wondering where that came from. I knew it was a Zohar, so I looked it up. So let me fill you in on that. That is a Zohar indeed. It's a Zohar Emer, Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Aleph, 97a. And it actually is not talking not about Rachel and Leah, and not about any other. It's a story about it's about the story of Seita, and it's actually taken from this piece is taken from Tzemach Tzedek, Eretz Nach. He brings the Zohar, and there's also in the Biyuri HaZohar from the Mittler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek a long explanation. The story goes is based on the Zohar, which refers to a story in the Medrash. It's a metaphor, maybe it's a parable story, but it's a story that says, so Masech the Seita, of course, the Pasha Seita Nase talks about, unfortunately, a woman that's accused by her husband of being unfaithful. And there's a whole way the Torah tests that person. So the Zohar and the Medrash explains it more at length, that there were two sisters, who one of them was a very faithful and God-abiding, God-fearing woman. The other was not. And one of them, and they looked alike. That's what it says there. They looked alike. So one is called Eishes Chayil, and one is called Eishes Znunim. So one behaved in an unfaithful way, and one was a Eishes Chayil, a woman of valor. And now they had to be, because it was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, so they had the laws of Seita, which comes down to Isha Kisishta. So the woman who had sinned didn't want to be caught, so she asked her sister to fill in for her, since they looked alike. So her sister went and dressed up in the garments of her sister, and of course she came out clean, so everything was fine. She actually, it says there that they'll actually have a birth and so on. So bottom line is, but then when they embraced afterwards, because her sister was thanking her sister for saving her life, so when she, the Medrash says that when she smelled the aroma of whatever was done by a Satan, of the different things you do that you put into the mouth of the woman, that caused her to die. That's what the Medrash tells the story. So the Zohar, referring to that, calls it the two sisters. And the Chassidus explains these two sisters refer to the Nefesh Habamis and Nefesh Halikis. Nefesh Halikis, of course, is a pure. The Nefesh Habamis is now the passions for this world. So that's what the Rebbe Rashab is referring to. The Tartan Achsen, this is the secret of the two sisters, Shein Tzara Zelazeh, that are in conflict with one another, or tzaras, they cause hostility between one another. Even though that word is not there, that they pressure one another, but it clearly, if you talk about Nefesh Halikis, Nefesh Habamis, it's like the battle between the two, and they can't coexist. So that's why I brought, just to fill you in on that detail. Okay. Now, finally, let me say one more thing, which is the end of the Mimer. Let me sum up the end of the Mimer. But before I do that, if anybody has any questions on what I said so far, because I'm doing more of like a summary of the whole flow before we go into the next section, Ayin Beis. If there are any questions, please. And if not, I'll sum up the end of the Mimer now. And then what I wanted to do was learn Tafresh Pei Beis, because there's one piece we still did not learn inside that corresponds to the piece about Teshuva Mevit Teshuva Le'elam. So it's not a long piece, but since we were learning Tafresh Pei Beis, the Friedrich Rebbe's Mimer, I thought appropriate to just tie that up as well. But that's what I'd like to do next. So first, let's stop if there's any questions. Oh, okay. Okay, with that said then, so then came the end of the Mimer. The end of the Mimer actually brings in even new points and more points from previous Maimarim. And it's clear that the Rebbe Rashab is connecting it all and like summing it all up. So the end of the Mimer is talking about a pasuk around Avram Avinu, where Hashem says, "Hamachas anim Avram," that will like conceal this from Avram, and then he reveals that which is he was considering concealing. So the whole discussion here is about what exactly is being revealed and what is concealed, and the answer is essentially what we just learned, what we just discussed, that God is revealing to Avram, Avram on his own is the level of the Kav, the Eir HaGvul. He's revealing him the concealed state, which he calls is the Eir HaBlikvul. Shem Havaya de Le'ela. And then he explains that the Mechasani, which means I conceal, I conceal, refers to the Tzimtzum Arishin, that concealed the Havaya de Le'ela. Okay? And then when he says, Amachasanim Avram, will I conceal it? No, it's for Avram, because Avram was Mekayim the Mitzvahs Milah. Mitzvahs Milah reveals the concealed, the Seid Hashem of the Eir HaBlikvul. So God says, I'll remove the concealment through the Nisyanas that Avram withstood, which removes the concealments through Teshuva. And that's the connection to all the Milah and to the Nisyanas. That's why Avram was Zeicha, merited to have a revelation of this higher level. So even though on his own he was the Kav, like the level of the Kav, and yet he has now the revelation from a place that's even higher. And that's why it says also by Aaron that he was able to go into the Holy of Holies in the schus of Milah, which removed the Havdalah between the Holy and the Holy of Holies. Okay. Then he said, Gam Yeshlemer. I'm just summing up in simple summary without reading it inside now. Then he says, Seid Hashem is Das Elyon. Seid Hashem is Das Elyon. Now, even though it's a Gam Yeshlemer, the truth is, it sounds very much, that's Havaya de Le'ela, Das Elyon. Shenikra Seid Legabe Ha'elam. But what he's adding here is why is it called Seid? It's not just concealed, it's also concealed from the world, because what's revealed in the world is Das Tachten. And here, clearly, he's connecting it to the theme that I mentioned before about Das Tachten, Das Elyon. That in this world, on its own, our perception is first existence exists, then you come to discover that there's a divine, an Ayin, that's a mysterious Ayin, an unknown force that creates existence. But Das Elyon is the opposite. The reality is God, and existence is a novelty and completely nullified. And that's the Seid Hashem, that's the secret that's revealed to Avram, who's the level of Er Pnimi. So now you have the joining and the fusion of Er Pnimi, the immanent energy that enters in existence, is experiencing the transcendent energy that's beyond existence. And that finally explains why it says Avram he'll be a great nation, the great Gadol. Gadol is referring to that it'll all come great and expanded in a revealed state. Because on its own, initially when creation is created, there's a hierarchy. That you don't have the infinite energy everywhere. On the contrary, it was concealed and receded. But through the Aveda that Avram did, by transforming this world and what's the word I used before, by the Nisyanas, withstanding the Nisyanas, the tests, and Milah, that brought down the Eir Ein Sof HaBlikvul, which is Gei Gadol. That means that the transcendent energy, which was once beyond existence, is now being revealed in a full extension. Gei Gadol, that the nations of the world itself recognizes how Avram becomes a great nation. So you have the chibur of pnimi makif. Yeah. And that's the summary of the end of the Mimer. So the end of the Mimer really, through the story of Avram, captures the same theme that we've been learning all these pages till now. And ultimately, it's the joining of all the different forces, which of course is the central theme of Ayin Beis. And with that, we concluded volume 2. So what I'd want to do now is learn Tofresh Pei Beis, just goes back a bit, not this end of the Mimer, goes back to page 1202 and 1203. Again, I'll stop again if anybody wants the questions. If not, I'm going to learn the last piece in Tofresh Pei Beis. Okay. Good. So in Tofresh Pei Beis, on my pages, it's a Mimer Baal Leischa. It's on page 333 in the volume that I have. I'm not sure what page is by you, but it's the middle of chapter 62. So I'm going to learn that inside now, okay? We had stopped right before that paragraph on page 1202. What I'm learning now corresponds with page 1202 in Ayin Beis. So after explaining how, let's see here. Removing the machla, not just the illness, but the root of illness. So then in the middle of the page, the line begins, V'charav b'yeser. He says, V'zeu g'dei l'tshuva shemevia refuah le'elam. And this is the meaning when you say tshuva is great, that it brings healing to the world. So now the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe is going to speak similar to what the Rebbe says. I said he parallels what the Rebbe Rashab says with some additions. He says, Amnam tzarich lahavin. Lama elam tzarich refuah. We have to understand, why does the world need healing? Umahu elam. That's what the Friedrich Rebbe adds. And what's the meaning of the word elam, the world? So Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab just said, why does the world need healing? The Friedrich Rebbe adds, what's the word world? What does we mean here by the world? That through tshuva, the world achieves a level of refuah healing. Acha inyan hu, the inyan in this is tehine elam hu loshen helam behester. Okay, so here you see that Rabbi Friedrich Rebbe is consistent with his addition. If you remember, when he spoke Esa elam nosim belibam, b'shvili nivra elam, he added a dimension that elam means not just that the responsibility of the world is given to you, that you need to elevate the world just like you elevate yourself, but also the very concealment of existence, because elam comes to the word concealment, is also part of your job. The concealment was given to you that you should reveal the divine within it. And he said that earlier, just to point out, he mentioned that a number of times when we learned about it. Elam nasim belibam. Where was it? Yeah. It was in chapter 61. On my page is 328, where he spoke about it. So now he's continuing with that approach, and this is all in addition until we get to the next page. This is all in addition from the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe in explaining the Ayin Beis. So I know maybe we should have learned it before we ended the Mimer, but you know what? We just went that order. So let's just recalibrate ourselves here. So he says like this: Tihine, elam huloshen helam v'hester. The word elam comes from the word helam v'hester, concealment and covering. U'kamoi v'nelam dovar. That's the para nelam dovar, like the sin that was concealed. So he says nelam dovar. So therefore, it's from the word helam. Or v'nelama me'ein kol chai. It's concealed from the eyes of all living. Basically, bringing proves that the word elam comes from the word helam. Not sure why these are proofs, because there it's about the word elam, helam, not the word elam. But clearly you see the word elam, you see the word the same root. That's what I think he means. Because elam me'en kol chai, me'en kol chai, what does it have to do with the world? Elam. Okay. The mokam ha'elam hu yeshu mitzias ma, shumaylo mastal er v'chayis. That the domain of the world, the place that it takes, that it occupies. In other words, its position. How do you categorize existence, olam, the world? That it's a yeshu mitzias ma, or yeshu mitzias mashu ma'ilo mastal er v'chayis. That it has substance and yeshus, a certain sense of self, that conceals and covers the life and the vitality. And that's the meaning that the world is from the word helam, concealment. Okay. So in other words, why is it a concealment? Because God created existence, created the world. But when you look at the world, you don't see the godliness within it. That means the God that is concealing the energy and the vitality within it. So that's why it's called from the word concealment. And that's why the creation of the world came into being through the concealment of the first tzimtzum. That was an Erein Sof Baruch Hu. In other words, why is this world in a state of concealment? Because it came from the tzimtzum. That's why the world conceals that which is in it, because it's rooted, the Chenisavis, from the tzimtzum. The Chenisavis mokem mitzias el mamish, and the same, that's in general existence. The same is the creation of the mokem mitzias el mamish, the actual space of the existence of this very world. Why the hell of is the concealment and the covering of the creator from the creation. Now he goes even further. Not only is the world conceals, that's the very substance of the world. You know, when you give something a name, the name captures the essence of that thing. So to say the world conceals the divine is fine. But you give the whole world the name concealment. It's like saying existence synonymous with the word concealment. Because the entire existence, that's what he says, it's not just that this world incidentally conceals. Its very existence is a state of concealment. And he gives an example. We know that there are there are 4 kingdoms, so to speak, 4 domains. The mineral world, the world of vegetation, semeach, the animal world, and the human. So each one has, Arizal says, there's a nefesh in each one. The nefesh of Adam is the soul of the human being. There's a nefesh of the chaya, of an animal. There's a nefesh hatzemeches. There's a nefesh, a spirit, that gives it semeach, its energy to grow, and everything it does in its existence. What about a daimon? A daimon seems to be inanimate, a mineral, a stone. Does it have a nefesh in it? So the answer is yes, it's a nefesh called a nefesh ha-daimemes. So the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, is going to compare that to the olam. The nefesh ha-daimemes is there, but it's completely concealed. In a flower or a vegetable or anything that grows, you at least see growth. And if you cut it off, the flower dies or the plant dies. An animal, for sure, you see life force, and a human even more so. But what about a daimon? So he says, a mineral or stone, a daimon, also has a nefesh that gives it life. And yet it's not seen in any way. All you see, it exists, but you don't see it move. It doesn't grow. You can't kill it. So nevertheless, there's a nefesh in it, but it's not nira, it's not discernible and revealed at all. Why is that the case? Because the geshem hanivra, the very physicality of this creation, daimon, umitziyuse, umitziyus chemre, and it's chemer, and geshem would be the physical. Chemer is more like the crassness or the coarseness of it. So both the geshem anivra umitziyus chemre, and it's very substance, and it's chemer. It's chemer is more than substance. How would you translate chemer? Geshem
material.
Well, geshem is also material. They're both material. Generally speaking, say gashmi v'chumri. Geshem is like the minimal of physical, and chumri is already where it indulges in its physicality. It's like a form of, like I said, crassness or coarseness. Here, geshem and chemer, there's ruach and chemer, or ruach and geshem. That would be spirit and matter, or energy and matter. In matter itself, chemer is usually much more, in Yiddish it would be grub, much thicker. So I'm not sure the exact word I would use here in English. I have to find another word, but that's the idea. But regardless, it has both Mesias Chemer and Milam, because so that's why in a stone, because the Geshem and Chemer are so dominant. They conceal and cover up the chayes that's in them. So he's giving this as an example for the olam in general. The chenu b'chol nivra. And the same is with every creation or creature. Here he says geshem chemre. There's a vitality that enlivens and energizes geshem chemre, the very physical substance of the item. Movad. So we know that there's two levels of chayis in every existence. There's the chayis that gives it vitality. When you say, for example, the soul inside the body. So the soul gives the body vitality, but the body is not created by the soul. The body has its own source of energy. But that source of energy is much more concealed. A soul inside of a body makes the body alive. You see it alive. It breathes, it heartbeats, it moves, and so on. So now he's bringing that. Every nivra has in it the chayes hamachaya, the chayes that gives it life. Like in a plant, it would be the life force that gives it power to grow. An animal will be the animal force. In a daimon, the nefesh is not revealed in any way. But there's another nefesh. He says that's the nefesh that gives it life. Mulvad v'chayes hanefesh hamachayes. So everything has its own source of. Its very existence comes from a life of force. Even a daimon has that. And besides the life force that gives it vitality. However, with a daimon, you don't see it at all. The force that gives it vitality is completely concealed. Not sure why he brings this geshem v'chemer, because what is he saying? That in a daimon it has two forces. One gives what you see is the very existence of the stone, like the very existence of a human body, irrelevant, regardless of the soul that gives it energy. And then a daimon has another nefesh, which is very concealed. Probably that's what he's saying. Yeah, nefesh adaimemes. Yeah. So then what do you need it for? It doesn't give it any vitality. It seems like he's saying that the nefesh adaimemes has one thing it's in common with Shemeach, Chaya, Medaber, and that is its very existence. Its very existence means something is giving it a life force. But vitality that it has is completely concealed, where in Shemeach, Chaya, Medaber, it's not. That's what it sounds like he's saying. Adam, like a person, okay, he's giving the example I just gave. That a human being, besides the nefesh, which is the life force that vitalizes him, there's also a life force, an energy force that is b'mekayim, sustaining the very body of the person. And that's why when the spirit separates, the soul separates from the body, the body doesn't just fall apart and decompose immediately. Right. Why? Because it has its own source of existence. In time, it will decompose because ultimately even that source is also connected to the soul. But that's a different discussion. The point is, if the very body was getting its life energy from the place that gives vitality, so as soon as the vitality is gone, everything should disappear. But it's not the case. There's two forces at work here. That's why it says in Pasuk Eliyahu, it's like a keli. When the oil leaves the keli, it remains like a body without a soul. Okay. And the same is with all creatures. They have two life forces. One that gives substance to its very body, and one that is a life vitality, that's a revealed force that gives it life, whatever that force of life is, whether it's human, animal, or plant. So v'chein b'chol nevroim hu mitzad hachayish sheyesh boi. V'chein b'chol nevroim hu mitzad hachayish sheyesh boi. That's right. Mitzad hachayish sheyesh boi, that exists due to the chayis. And nevertheless, this energy is not needed, not obvious and revealed at all. Because the chemer, the substance, the matter, conceals. Okay, I'm not sure this last line. What's he saying? He didn't say before. Well, Frierdiker Rebbe definitely went a little more deeper into this whole subject by saying, not only is the world come from a state of concealment, similar to the mineral world, where though there's an energy in it, besides the energy that gives it very existence, is completely concealed. So too, the Olam conceals the divine within it. So the difference would be, the Olam is because the divine is concealed in everything in existence, even in a plant and an animal and a human. The divine is concealed. So regarding the divine, it's similar to daimon, where the energy is concealed. There's no life vitality. That's what he's saying here. Why he's bringing the second force, I'm not positive why he's bringing it. Is he trying to say that it's even more concealed? Because you could also argue that he's saying that the very substance of our bodies, the life force within us in a human being is obvious. You see, the person speaks, he walks, he talks, his heart is beating, he's breathing. Chaynesa is carrying himself. You could see the difference between a corpse, God forbid, and a live human being. However, the life force within the body itself, you don't see. You just see that it exists, but you don't see any life force. There's nothing revealed. Is he bringing that? Is he saying that in order to bring that point out? Not sure, because on the other hand, the nefesh demem, then why would he even bring nefesh dememes? Then he should just say that, that there's an energy that exists, but it's completely concealed. That's the energy that gives the body its very substance. There's nothing about it that's revealed. But he didn't begin that way. He began, let's first use a stone as an example, daimon as an example, a mineral, where there has a nefesh, but it's not revealed. And then he went, so maybe he's trying to say both things. I'm just thinking out loud here. Maybe the first example was the stone or the mineral, that it has a life force, but the life force is not revealed. Then he's going further. The truth is, everything is an example for Elam. Why? Because everything has the body that is not the vitality, that's not revealed. In other words, basically at daimon, both things are concealed. There's no vitality that's within the stone, and the stone itself is obviously, you don't see, except the substance, you don't see the energy. By tsemeach, the vitality part you do see. You see the tsemeach is growing, but the very body of the plant is hidden. The same thing with animal, and the same thing with the human. Maybe he's saying it to bring out both points. But I'm still wondering is, what about nefesh dememes? Does it indeed have two forces? You have to say it does. And they're both concealed. You have to say the stone itself is like the substance, and even the nefesh doesn't have any revealed state. Then the question is, what role does it play? In its sameach, it makes the plant grow. In a daimon, what would that second level of energy achieve? I'm not sure. So I need to think about it some more, but that's what it seems like he's saying. Let me just see the flow again.
It achieves the existence.
One second. Give me a minute before I finish. you could read both ways in the Mimer here. That daimim is that way because the Chemer itself there's no revelation, or there's a nefesh that's not revealed as well, or you can read the other way around because the flow as he goes, he says v'chein b'chol nivra hu lefisha geshem anivra tzichem man master lachaysh. You can learn both ways. Actually, when I read it now again. Yeah, you want to say something? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that you asked what is the nefesh of the daimim achieving? It's achieving the existence of the daimim. Hashem wants the daimim should be. Same way that Sameach is going.
So that's the chayis that's there in everything that just gives it substance, like the chayis in the body of a human being as well. That the question I had was, if a nefesh hadememes also has two elements, one that gives it the life to the body itself, like that gives the human body that it exists, and does it have another nefesh, like we have a nefesh, by us it's revealed, and by a nefesh hadememes it's not revealed. Is there two different nefashos? Like in Semeach Chaim Medaber, for sure there are two different. That was what I was wondering. Could say yeah, you could say no. When I'm reading this, it's not clear 100% which way it is. You understand what I'm saying? Maybe its role is that it gives it shape and that gives it some shape and form. One mineral is different than another. Maybe that's what it is. The tsura of the daimim. The tsura. Like, for example, a diamond is different than a quartz, and a stone is different than salt, according to the opinions that is daimim. So what makes it one different than the other? Maybe that's the nefesh hadememes, but it's still not revealed. It just gives it a different shape and form. That may be the pshat. Now that I think about it, is everyone following what I'm saying, or I lost you?
Yeah, we're following.
Okay, but regardless, the real point that he wants to come to now, and I'm on the next page, he says, so the olam is similar to that. That the olam, why is it called olam? Because Shmoye Sheyikre B'Lashon HaKodesh, its very name indicates its very essence, because the world is fundamentally a state of concealment. So now you see the Rebbe Rafidi Rebbe adding a whole richness to the theme that we're discussing here. We're soon going to be learning that the olam, why is it maybe refuah? Remember the question was, why does the world need refuah? And what does it mean by the world? So we already have the answer. The world, its very essence is concealment, so it needs a healing from the concealment. The Rebbe Rashab went straight to the mechitzas that we're going to learn about in a moment, and did not speak so much or at all about the helm of the world itself. But he does say it. I mean, he's going to say it in the mechitzas. The Frierdiker Rebbe elaborates basically. And this is the meaning, that greatest truth that it brings healing to the world. That's what refuah is, to remove the very nature that the world is, because of the tzimtzum, the world conceals the divine. That's the refuah. V'zeu pirush v'gama elam nasan b'libay. This, he goes back to what he said earlier in the previous. This is also the meaning, Gama Elam. Also, the world, Nasan Belibe, was given to his heart. Belibe Adam. Belibe Shala Adam. What does that mean? The Helam Arishan. Gama Elam, from the word Helam. Also, the Helam Arishan, who totally believe Adam Ubavedase Canal, is dependent on the heart of the person and his service. Before he said Helam Elam, he said the Helam who nitla Adam levarere. Nasan liba, he gave the Helam a similar idea, that the Helam is dependent on the heart and the aveda of a person to remove the concealment. Okay, very nice. So now va'inyan hu. Again, this whole thing was an addition. This whole piece about the Helam of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab. Now he's going back to the Lashon, to the language of the Rebbe Rashab on page 1202. So if you're comparing, he's now bringing it back to the Medrash. What's the Inyan? Right? Inyan who? In Isa b'medrash kehelis, it says in medrash kehelis, on the pasuk doyer helach v'der ba, a generation comes, a generation goes. This is the same language of Ayin Beis. What does it say? Ksiv machatzti v'ani erpa.
Should I take it back the Vadim? I could take.
What does it say? Machatzti v'ani erpa. I have healed, I have wounded, v'ani erpa, and I will heal. Hakesi ein ksivkan ela machatzti. It doesn't say hakesi from the word maka, that I will strike. It says I will machatzti, I will wound. So why the word machatzti is used, not hakesi? You should have said hakesi. I will strike, like you say a maka, like the makas, esser makas. Or when you say a maka, is when God strikes. Why does it say machatzti? So the Medrash says because it also comes from the word mechitza. He wants to say something more than just that God strikes us, or God strikes and hurts someone. Mechitza sisi ben elyenim v'tachtenim. I built or made a mechitza, a partition between the upper and the lower. Elyenim kayomim v'tachtenim mesim. That which is above, the upper ones, the upper creations, they persist, they persevere. Chayom means that they're sustained. V'tachtenim mesim. So kayom means they live on, they endure. And tachtenim die. Be'elam haza, in this world. In this world, the alyenim, meaning most likely the celestial bodies, but you could say, because he says elam haza, they kayomim beish, they perpetuate as individual entities. And tachtenim are not kayomim beish, they die individually, even though they're kayomim b'min, the species. But he's talking here about the individuals. Avla elam haba ein misa kol ikar. But the elam haba, in the world to come, misa will not be existent. Even though kol ikar means it won't be primary, but here he means that it'll be obliterated. Death will be swallowed up by eternal life. The Rebbe Rashab did not bring all of this. The second half of this medrash. Then he says, "Va'af oisa mechitza nei merapa esa." So not only will there be eternal life, the mechitza, and also the mechitza the same mechitza that I had built, that I had created, that separates, I will heal. And that's why it says v'zeu machatzti. That's why it says not hikesi but machatzti. Mechitzosi ani erpa. Machatzti. Also for the mechitzosi, the partition I made, I will heal. Okay, so now he's going to explain what this means. What does all this mean? V'hinei, this is the Ayin Beis, similar to Ayin Beis. V'hinei, mechitza u'rekia mavdul b'mayim l'mayim. Mechitza is the rekia, the firmament that God created. Day 2, everything was covered in water. So God said, let me separate, v'yavdil, separate mayim and mayim, the lower waters from the higher waters. Okay. The mayim u'mayim, hu mayim elyenim u'mayim tachtenim. The 2 waters is the higher waters and the lower waters. The mayim matzmichim kol minei tainug. Again, this is all from Ayin Beis. Mayim gives growth to all matters of pleasure. Like he says, the end of Tanya, chapter 1, and the end of chapter 1 in Tanya. Well, so what's the difference between mayim elyenim and mayim tachtenim? Mayim elyenim matzmichim tainugim ruchnim. The mayim elyenim, the higher waters, they give birth, they sprout and give growth to spiritual pleasures. Aden shir legamri, without any limit at all. Umayim tachtenim matzmichim tainugim gashmim ad ein shir. And Maim Tachtenim, the lower waters, they give growth to, they may grow the physical pleasures without limit. Here he doesn't use the word ligamri, he just says adei shir. The Rebbe Rashab doesn't have these language altogether. He just says komine tainug. Just Gashmi Saruch. So the Ein Shir or Ein Shir ligamri, Friedrich Rebbe's additions. Okay. And what's the difference between these two? Commotion is bar li'il be'in yida'enu satya chayim v'atei v'amoves v'ara. Friedrich Rebbe spoke about this earlier. So he refers, the Rebbe Rashab brought to the Eya Nechinesim Lefnechem as well, that we learn Nasati rather. Rei Nasati, behold, I have given before you Achayim v'atei, the path of life and goodness, v'amoves v'ara, and of death and evil. Ruchnis, which is goodness, that's the level of life. And moves is is evil. Doesn't say that in Beis. It doesn't speak about it. I first thought that's evil on its own, but maybe it could be ma'atzme she'en le kiyum klal. On its own, it doesn't have any kiyum of its own. The language is a little, seems ara hura, like we say shema'atzme ein le kiyum klal. Ara hura ma'atzme. Okay, but regardless, it's basically saying that Ra does not have any sustenance because it's not divine. It's the opposite of godliness, so it's the opposite of life. Doesn't have any sustenance. And what separates between these two mayim, these two levels of pleasure, the things that are, let's call it temporary pleasures that die, that are temporary, and eternal pleasures of ruchnis, of spiritual. There's a mafsik. What's the mafsik? Separates between them. Hu harakia mavdil. That's the harakia, the firmament, the sky that God created. It separates. The hine. Now, Havdalah harakia nemer Beis pamim. Says twice in the pasuk, the Torah. Yehi rakia vehi mavdil. There shall be a rakia vehi mavdil, and it shall separate. And then va'beis veyasal lekimas rakia veyavdil. V'mayim l'mayim. So you see twice. Why is that as if to say twice? He said it once already, separating. Because in Havdalah, there's also, only in the holy levels, there's also yesh mesachim parsois. There's also partitions and curtains. Uksiv hivivdilu lachem aparechus ben hakedesh ben kedesh kadosh. That he shall separate a curtain between the holy and the holy of holies in the Mishkan. The Isa besifli ditznusa reish perek hey. Shu Havdalah ben Atzilus la'atik. And this is all from Ayin Beis. Yeah, that this is the separation. Sifli ditznusa is a section in the Zohar. In a section of the Zohar, it says there that's the separation between Atzilus and Atik, the higher level of Keser. I'm going quickly here because we learned all of this in Ayin Beis. And the same is with the hyphen between the two names of Havaya. Tiksiva Yikra Havaya, Havaya, Beis Shemus Havaya. It says twice Havaya in the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Echad Shem Havaya del Tata, Beis Shem Havaya del Eila, Upsik Taima Begavayu. So one is Havaya, the lower Havaya. The other is the higher Havaya. So you see in Kedusha itself, in holiness, Havaya is a holy name. And there's between them, Begavayu, between them, there's a Psik Taima, a separation, similar to the curtain between the holy and the holy of holies. The Yesh Havdalah ben Kedesh Lachel. And the second Havdalah in the Pasuk, by Yavdel, is referring to the separation or the divider between holy and the profane, or the holy and the weekday, or the mundane. The Chel u'meloshen Chela. The word Chel comes from the word Chela, from the word illness. Shu Kelipas Nogah shehi machla. That's the level of Kelipas Nogah because it's not death, but it's not life. So it's like an interface between life and death, which is illness. But machla, the root of illness, Kelipas Nogah, not sholosh Kelipas hatmeis, that would be death. That would be that which is forbidden, if you recall. The chela sheyesh b'sakana. Here we're talking about it's not health, because it's not kedusha, it's not holiness, but it can go both ways because it's already permissible, but it's already an indulgence. Like we said, taivas heter. That's machla. Machlu amafsik ben achayim lemisa. The machla separates between life and death. The misa him gimel klippus hatmeis. Misa is the three impure shells. Umachlu klippus nega. And machla is the level of klippus nega. Hu amafsik ben chayim leifuche. And it separates between life and the opposite. V'zeu mechitza sisi. And this is what the Eibishter said, the Medrash says, God said, mechitza, machatzdi. I created a mechitza, a partition, a klipas nega. I created klipas nega, the lepomim hutev, that at times is good. Klipas nega could also be used for the good, as he explains in Tanya, chapter 6 and 7. So that's the mechitza that God created. Klipas nega, created a shell, but it's not a shell that's completely airtight and doesn't allow the spark to come out, which is osur bidei chitzenim, means it's bound and held hostage, like a nitzutz, a spark, like chaticha nasa nevela, like something that's been held is being held hostage by the negative forces. This is also not pure holiness, so it's an in-between called a mechitza. It's a partition, a divider between the holy, kedush l'chayil. So there's been kedush l'kedush, that's obviously all in holiness, a partition. That's a holy partition, so to speak. And between kedush and chayil. I already pointed out when we learned here that according to this, it says chayil is the language from the word chayla, so it's not a partition between kedush and chayil, because chayil itself is the partition, based on what he said here. Klipas nega is chayil, so does he mean that there's the chayil, maybe chayil sheyesh b'sakana would be the chayil as in shalosh klipas hatmeis, then there's chayil machla, the root, is the animal soul, which is klipas nega, that's in between the holy and the shalosh klipas hatmeis, maybe. But when he says chayil, he does say it's from the word chayla, and then he says chayla. So no, I got it. No, my mistake. It's correct what I just said, but something more. There's chayla and there's machla. That's the key. Chayla is already an illness. Machla is the root of the illness, the eish zara, the alien fire passion of the animal soul, which can go both ways. It's still not necessarily prohibited. So that's what he means here. That's the word. Okay. I'm just going back to the machla hu amafsik. The chayla begins chayla. So klipas nega the language machla chayla is a little okay, but that I think is the pshat. Then he continues, and then I will heal this mechitza. What does that mean? The mechitza of klipas nega, remember, is a concealer. Klipas nega would not be possible. It's still a shell that's concealing, but it's klipas nega. It's a glowing concealment. Nega means it's shining. You can see through the klippa like, let's say, an olive peel, or a peel, or olive, whatever it's called, or a peel of a grape. You can see through it, as opposed to, let's say, a nut, an oguz, that you can't see the fruit within, or other peels. So you could see it, but it is a state of concealment, klipas nega, and it leaves the potential, as the Shalah says, that you can start valuing the peel more than the fruit. Like we said before, in the Elam, the world is called a world of klippas because we see this world, we don't see the divine within it. But the purpose of it is to reveal it. So he says, now God will heal this mechitza. He will remove the concealment. Through our Aveda, by us removing the concealment as much as we're capable of, and revealing the divine in this world, God will heal the mechitza and reveal and remove the concealment. The zeo mashal gilid el gilid el osidlem. I'm just going to finish this, so a few more lines. The zeo mashal el gilid el osidlem nemar b'yemahu yi avayachot. And this is the meaning, what we say in Zechariah, that b'yemahu, in the future, that day, will be havayachot, meaning the revelation of the divine unity. The kulei tev, it means kulei tev, everything will be goodness. There will not be ra. Yem shekulei tev. A day that's completely good, endless goodness. Lies, why? Because there'll be the revelation of the divine infinite pre-tzimtzum energy. So therefore, it's going to be in that type of state because there will be no longer that mechitza, like he said. The Rebbe Rashab, let's see how he brought it. And here he says the chibur of the Beis Shem. The Frierdiker Rebbe here, for some reason, is much more brief. The Rebbe Rashab says more because there'll be the chibur of the two havayas, havaya del el, havaya del tata. Okay. The Frierdiker Rebbe now is going to be tying it up much more brief, because I guess his Mimer, it doesn't necessarily need all these details. So he's saying like this now. Okay. V'zehu, the Gdela Teshuva shemevia Rafale elam, and this is the meaning that Teshuva is great because it brings healing to the world. The idea Teshuva shemas mesir. Masir, Elam is vestated through Teshuva that he removes the concealments and the coverings, like we learned about Teshuva law, and awakens that inner and core power from the depths of the spirit. So that he removes the concealment, which is the tzimtzum arishin, and the higher purpose of creation is fulfilled. And the pre-tzimtzum infinite light radiates. That's the level of chaya chaim, the life, the source of all life, chaya chaim. That which gives life. Like we said about machla is the root of illness, so there's the root of life. Chaya chaim. This comes to the Aveda b'chol ma'itcha. Shu harotze v'kleis hanefesh. That's the rotze, the yearning and the kleis hanefesh, the expiration of the spirit. Where it leaves from the domain of containers, legamri, completely. Because that's part of the Frierdiker Rebbe's mind. Remember, from the koiches to the chushim, you're going from a level of koyach to the level of chushim, which is part of the theme of Pei Beis, not so relevant to our discussion here. And that's where the Frierdiker Rebbe ends. The rest of it is the end of his Mimer, which is not negeya to our topic here too much. No. Okay. But the Rebbe Rashab said a lot more about this, because he finished the subject that the mechitzas are all healed to the point you transform them. You transform them and you bring down chaya chayim. Yeah, I'm not going to go over the Ayin Beis. You could read that. We already read that. But now we learned the Tafresh Pei Beis. So with that, we finished Tafresh Pei Beis. And I will now, I think I conclude what I have to conclude. So we're ready to learn the next volume. But anybody have any questions? Went a little
I had
longer
a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. There was something that the Frierdiker Rebbe said. My page is different than your page numbers, but let me see where it's a good paragraph up. Let's see here. It says, hold on. Yeah. It says the Hamahus Hurrah Matzmo she'ein lo kiyum klal. Okay.
Yeah.
So how does that relate to the notion that there is some, I don't know, vitality, even though it's not a healthy one, in the Sitra Achra?
So this is a classic question. This is all over. That's why he says ma'atzmei. On its own, it doesn't have, but it has due to the divine spark in it. This is a, I don't know if you listen to Tanya that I teach on Saturday night, but at the end of Tanya Perik Aleph, he says, they don't have any good at all. So Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Rashab all explain they don't have good on their own because they themselves are negative. But there's always a divine spark in there that is like being held hostage or darkened like a black hole. So the word means, but on its own, it doesn't have anything.
That's what got it. Yeah, I am watching your class, but I'm catching up. I'm on like episode 9.
No, fine. That's all right. I'm just mentioning, I discussed it more at length in explaining the end of chapter 1 in Tanya, because he says that.
Like the last episode.
So they qualified that by saying that. That's why I think ma'atzmei means on its own. That's why I read it that way. Okay, good.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the term refuah. Now, normally we talk about tikkun olam, the takein olam b'malchut shakai. So I wanted to know what is the distinction between refuah and tikkun.
Well, in this context, I think tikkun is a much broader term because it means repairing everything. And here in these Mimerim, his focus is more on illness and healing, whereas tikkun would be more, the opposite of tikkun would be something that is in disrepair, let's say, toyu, chaos, toyu and tikkun. So I think tikkun is just a broader name, but they have similarities because both of them are repairing something that was broken some way. All comes down to how you define the brokenness. So there's nothing here that indicates a necessary analysis to divide between the two. I just see it as different contexts. So I think tikkun is a much larger term. And refuah is more specific, like you're talking about tshuva. Like when there's a lack of health on different levels. But you could also define chayli as a something that needs tikkun. Just like you say it needs refuah. So I just think refuah is used more when you're talking about the unhealthy state of, let's say, a person's passions completely consumed with this world, or an unhealthy state like a chayli, Kelipas Nogah, Kelipas Nogah. So I just think it's context. When you talk in terms of lack of health, you use healing. When you term in terms of it's not harmonious and not completely, or it's not a repaired world, a broken world, you'd use the word tikkun. That's my own little way of explaining it in general terms. I don't know if there's a,
Seems
okay.
It's unusual, but
it's not unusual because you don't see refuah used like you see so many places in Chassidus Tikkun. He's using refuah for a very particular reason, because he wants to speak about chelis ava. When you say cheli, refuah, and the mechatzti v'aniyerpa. Remember, I mean, your question, let's put it this way, your question is a question, but it's not really a legitimate question from the point of view of how you learn something. That's like saying, why in certain midrashim, he says, why does the pasuk say mechatzti v'aniyerpa? Why doesn't he say shavarte v'ani mesaken? Let's ask a question on the pasuk. The pasuk in Azinu. You could say, I broke and then I fixed. He uses the word I wounded and I healed. Different places use different terms for different reasons. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a theological difference here. I think it's just different terms used in different contexts. Like when you speak about health, refuah is the right word to use. That's how I would explain it. I don't know if there's a fundamental issue here.
That's what I was asking, if there was a fundamental issue. Okay.
That only if there's a Mimer that talks about it. If someone went and discussed it. Here, for all practical purposes, it doesn't really change the pshat anywhere.
and the term whole, from whole, meaning from whole as sick. So without that expression, that shorish of that word, is that a widely used term in Chassidus, that like lemudei chol? Would you say that's you're learning about sickness? Because ultimately the word
I
whole
wouldn't quite,
comes from
no, I
whole.
wouldn't say that. No, you have to be careful where you use it. Here he's speaking here about spiritual concepts. He's not speaking here in the vernacular of pedestrian language that we speak about. That chayil has an element. Remember, let me ask you a question. Would you call the tzimtzum harishon a state of illness?
Concealment is normally the term, right?
Right. But concealment has an element that can lead to illness, because once there's a separation, if the divine was complete, we learned on page 1201, beautiful explanation, what is health, both physical health and spiritual health. And he said that when there's a seamless flow between the life vitality and the kelim, that's called health. If there's any blockage or any diminishment or any disruption of the flow of either circulation of the blood or oxygen, that creates illness. Now, of course, there's many levels of it. You could have a small little block and it just goes away. You could have, God forbid, a clot that can cause death. So my point is, seamlessness is key. Achdus. As soon as there's the tzimtzum is a rift. It's a concealment, true, and its intention is to reveal. But like the Rebbe says in that famous Tu B'Shvat Sicha, God concealed himself so well, the child stops seeking, stops looking. And that's where the problems begin. In other words, the tzimtzum is not per se a negative thing, but it can lead to negative, because before the tzimtzum, there's no room. Everything is healthy. There's a seamless flow. So in that sense, when you use chayil, God created Yemei HaChayil. It's not man-made. God said 6 days of the week shall be chayil, Yemei HaMaaseh, and one day should be Kodesh, Shabbos Kodesh. But the mere fact that he created something that's not purely revealed holiness like Shabbos leaves the potential for chayli. So it doesn't mean, you can use lemudei chayil, for example, like the Alter Rebbe says in chapters 8 and Tanya. You can use it for chapters 7 or 8. You can use it for Kedusha, the Rambam, for Parnosa and so on. But on the other hand, if you're disconnected from God, science and lemudei chayil can become something that, yes, it can become an unhealthy force that builds an ego and disconnects from God. So chayil is not per se a bad thing. Chayil has the word chayil. Remember, we also learned chayil is someone who has 49 gates of wisdom, of understanding, and is lacking the 50th gate. Or chayil is someone who sees godliness with their mind and almost as real as with your eyes, and is also called chayil. So the word chayil has many meanings. It could also mean a very slight, subtle split between God, like Moshe Rabbeinu was called chayil because he had 49 gates. But his chayil you can't hardly compare to, God forbid, a real illness, a physical illness, like a life-threatening illness. So it all context. Okay.
Thank you. That's good.
Sure. Okay, so we did the Tafresh Pei Beis. We finished Ayin Beis, volume 2.